A human being is, in the beginning, like a broad and shallow river flowing sluggishly toward the sea. Most of his potential energy seeps away by covering too much unnecessary ground. Now, if you can take that individual and cut him a straight, deep channel, deep, not wide, he'll get to his destination in a fraction of the time. He'll lose practically none of his energy along the way, wandering all over the countryside, and the power of his energy will be multiplied by hundreds, even thousands. This is the channel every person is looking for. With so many possible areas in which to work and build, it's a real job sometimes to find the right one. Sometimes it takes many years. I know men who haven't found the road that was right for them until they were in their 60s. Then they've accomplished more in 5 years than they had formerly accomplished in 40. The trick is to make the decision, give it everything we've got, and stay with it until one of two things happen. One, you decide you've definitely made the right decision, or two, that you've made the wrong decision. Now, there's no problem if it's the first. If it's the second, you've just got to try again. But behind your decision, remind yourself that it's better to be outstanding at one thing than to be mediocre in a dozen or so. If you do one thing well, you can still dabble in other things as hobbies in your free time. But if you're trying too many things and not very successful in any of them, you won't enjoy yourself, you won't know any real accomplishment. Of one thing you can be sure. In studying the lives of thousands of successful people, whether it was raising crickets or running a little hole-in-the-wall restaurant, or working as a salesman, accountant, attorney, or back in the shop, whatever it happened to be, these individuals made up their minds to do it as well as they possibly could. More than any other single thing, it is this attitude that invariably brings success. It's caring more for the destination than the hours involved. It's realizing that this attitude gets rid of competition immediately, and today, this attitude is rarely found. Well, anyway, if you've been troubled by the old familiar human malady of running up too many roads and trying to run up more than one at a time, pick the one out of all of them which seems to offer the most promise and which you think you'll enjoy, forget all the rest, and dig a deep, straight highway to your goal in life. You'll be amazed at how quickly it can be reached, and the time will pass anyway. If you would reach a lot of places during your life, don't make the mistake of trying to reach more than one at a time. There's time enough for all of them. Let go and grow. To climb, one hand must go above the other. So in life. We succeed not by hanging fearfully to the old, but by reaching out, taking new handholds mentally, accepting, welcoming, adapting new and better ideas. Hold fast, we fail. Let go, we grow. The choice is ours. It's good, isn't it? Hold fast, we fail. Let go, we grow. This excellent advice applies to just about anything you can think of, from raising children to succeeding at our job or business. It's another one of those seeming paradoxes that we have trouble learning. To have something, we must turn it loose, free it. If we try to cling to it, we lose it. To get, we must give. You know, this is something we should never lose sight of. As we get older, as persons and as businesses, we have a tendency to want to cling to the old, to be suspicious of anything new and exciting. Our attitude seems to be one of, don't rock the boat. This is a successful way of doing things. Let's stay with it. Let's hang on to what we've got and ride out a future we can't be sure of. But this attitude, in many ways, can only lead to decline and eventual failure. This is a turning of the back to life, and it's something life won't stand for. To grow, we must let go. We must force an attitude of increase upon ourselves, an attitude that accepts, that welcomes the new and maintains a healthy suspicion of the old. As one executive put it, if it works, it's obsolete. And while this is not true in the strictest sense, it's a marvelous attitude for a businessman to hold, because whatever it is, it will be obsolete before long. Now, this is something I think each of us should check ourselves against regularly, weekly, if not daily. We should ask ourselves, what am I still doing the old way? Have I dug myself a rut or two that I'd be better off to climb out of? Be leery of the man who says, I've always done it this way and that's the way I'm going to continue to do it. He's a human dinosaur, and he's headed for the boneyard. Here's another absurd old saying that you frequently used to hear. It was good enough for my father, and it's good enough for me. This is the man we ought to ask to use the telephone his father used, and drive his dad's old car, and wear his old clothes, and eat his food, and live in his house, and use his forms of transportation. No, what was good enough for my father is not good enough for me, and nothing is good enough. Everything is changing, and the wise man or woman is the one who takes a yes attitude toward life, who looks for and expects change and improvement in every department of life, and who knows that to climb you've got to let go with one hand in order to place it up above the other. You can't get to second base and keep one foot on first. You've got to let go to grow. If you're not eating or mowing your lawn or thinking or working or living better today than you were a year ago, you've got yourself a little problem. Maybe you're hanging on when you should be letting go. I've come to the opinion, as the result of long observation and probably a good deal of prejudice, that there are mainly three kinds of people in the world. One of them is unfortunate. One of them makes a serious mistake. And the third is the most fortunate of all human beings. As I attempt to describe these three individuals, ask yourself in which category you believe you best fit. You can't really tell too much about people by observing them at their leisure, at the theater, on the golf course, at the beach, and so forth. I believe the best way to observe people is while they're working at whatever they've chosen to do. So here are the three main types. One, the unfortunate. This is the person who lives a life of reaction. By that I mean he reacts to his existence. He looks upon his work as something unpleasant that must be performed in order to make a living. This unfortunate person is not happy in his work and is therefore impatient and discontented with his leisure. He's largely suspicious of other people and is constantly on the alert for real or imagined slights that he can complain about or criticize. He looks for reasons things cannot be done rather than for ways in which they can. As a worker, he takes secret delight in telling customers that the item they've chosen is not available, or that it's closing time, or that he's too busy. Living in constant frustration himself, he tries to find comfort in frustrating others, but only succeeds in thus rendering his own life more frustrating. He ages quickly, as though to say to the world that he wants to get through this unhappy life as quickly as possible. Number two, the uncommitted. This person does a pretty good job. You really can't find fault with him, but you somehow sense he is temporary in what he does. He has one foot in his life and one foot feeling around outside of it, in case something better might come along. He's an idle wisher and dreamer, but does nothing to make them come true. He plays it safe with what he's got, but remains poised to jump if something offering more solid or attractive footing presents itself. He misses greatness in the life he has by hoping it will come along in something he does not have. And three is the committed. Here's the person who's found what he wants to do and abandons himself to it with everything he's got. He seems to know that it's impossible to become great at everything, and so intelligently makes up his mind to become great at that which it's been given him to do. Wanting nothing else, he takes delight and satisfaction in doing surpassingly well that which he has of his own free will chosen to do. This is the person who's largely responsible for the livelihood of everyone else. Putting all of himself in what he does and staying with it, he eventually succeeds head and shoulders above the great majority. Being interested and caught up in his days, he ages very slowly and, barring an unforeseen event, usually lives to a comfortable and cheerful old age. Instead of reacting to life, he acts first and makes life give him the rewards he sets in motion. Well, which of the three types are you? Possibly few people fit perfectly into one or the other, but one will generally dominate in their lives. Try committing yourself to what you're now doing and watch what happens. Cool, calm, collected people do not necessarily make the best problem solvers, says Dr. Sidney J. Blatt of Michael Reese Research Institute. Dr. Blatt tested 100 persons on an electronic device which poses problems while at the same time recording physiological changes in the problem solver. And the people who just sat there calmly, showing no agitation, no increase in heart rate, got nowhere fast. Whereas people like us, whose hearts thudded with excitement from a normal pulse rate of 72, some climbed to 136 times a minute, were quick with the answers. Perhaps if Albert Einstein had merely counted to 10 every time he got excited, we wouldn't have had the theory of relativity. I'd like to congratulate Dr. Blatt. I've always believed we operate better when we're excited about something. There's something wrong, in my humble opinion, with people who don't get emotionally involved in things. How many great books, paintings, musical compositions, or just about anything else worthwhile would we have if the people who produced them had remained calm, aloof, and cool? The best teachers are those who are excited and emotionally involved in their subjects. And it's the same with businessmen, scientists, parents, you name it. Excitement is a normal and natural thing. It's meant to help us. When our heart beats faster, it's pumping more blood so that we can do a bigger and better job. When excitement pumps adrenaline into our system, there's a reason for it. We have more power, more ability to meet a crisis. Getting back to the problem-solving thing, and speaking, of course, as a layman, I would think that the faster the heartbeat, the better the brain would operate, since it would have a faster flow of blood and oxygen caused by more rapid breathing. I'm sure that when young graduating doctors are given the equanimitas lecture to keep them from showing fear or excitement in front of their patients, it certainly is not intended to keep them from being excited about the subject of medicine. Who would get married if it weren't for the emotional and excitement involved? And this could be carried quite a few steps further. The happiest people on earth are those who are emotionally involved in what they're doing. This calm, cool, collected bit is all right for cows, camels, and turtles, but it'll never produce a great sermon, symphony, play, business, piece of architecture, painting, marriage, or the miracle of a child. In my book, when you lose the excitement and heightened feeling of emotion in what you're doing, you'd best look around for something else. In fact, this is a very good way to determine if what you're now doing is the right thing for you to do, whether or not you're excited and emotionally involved in it. Excitement is to the mind what heat is to the manufacture of steel. It gives it strength, flexibility, and adaptability. You know, machines grow obsolete because they're unable to change. The times must change and will with ever-accelerating momentum. As they do, the machines of today will find themselves idle in the coming years, just as the machines of yesterday are idle today. But human beings are not machines, however fond they are of acting like them, and they can change. Never before in the history of man has it been as necessary as it is today for us to develop a new awareness of ourselves with respect to our changing world. We need to face the fact that in the world of tomorrow, jobs as we know them today will be radically different or eliminated entirely. So then, what can we do about it? We can take the advice of the former president of the University of Chicago, Robert M. Hutchins. We can learn. If we refuse to learn, if we insist upon acting like machines, we will find ourselves idle tomorrow. Every job is a part of a much larger organization. Organizations, industries don't die, they just change. The industry that once manufactured covered wagons is still here, but today it's making automobiles. Let's say that through a set of circumstances, a young man finds himself working as an attendant in a service station. He might wish he had done things differently, but it does no good to brood over the past. He's working in a service station today. He wants to get married and have a home and children, and to do this, he decides that he must earn more money than he's now receiving. And the first inclination is to look around for a job that pays more. Before he moves to a different job, he should make certain that the move entails learning a good deal more than he now knows. If he can make the switch without learning anything new or very little, the chances are he'll be no better off than he is today. Instead of looking at his job as it is now, he should look at the industry of which it's a part. In this case, the petroleum industry, one of the world's largest. Without leaving his job for the present, he can spend his free time studying the business he's already in. Now, instead of being a service station attendant, he's a trainee in a major industry. He no longer has a job. He's got his foot on the first rung of what can be a fine and extremely rewarding career. By sticking with his studies and doing an outstanding job when he's working, he'll soon be able to marry that girl and have that beautiful home, and in time earn anything else he wants. Learning is the answer for him, and it's the answer for us. The same thing applies to the boy working in the supermarket or the local garage as a salesman. Naturally, it's best to stay in school, for school is the best place to learn. But for those who've dropped out, the answer is the same. Learn. Learn all you can, and keep learning, whether you're 16 or 60. And you'll find your way in this changing world of ours, and you'll find it infinitely more interesting, substantially more rewarding. The minute a man stops learning, our civilization will begin to pass him by. He will be left a lonely and disconsolate figure in its wake. It's a decision each of us must make.
In every field of human endeavor, it's the successful men and women who make the important difference. They see growth and improvement as the natural order of things, and they can see themselves growing into new arenas of achievement and commensurate reward. Only that day dawns to which we are awake, wrote Henry Thoreau. What a pity it is for a human being with the gift of consciousness to take life and all that's connected with life for granted. to live each day as his or her due and quite likely find more to criticize than to be grateful for. Yet that's exactly how millions live out their lives. They often give the impression that they have a contract with forever, when it's really for only a handful of years between the bookends of mystery. Why not give it all we have to give? Why not make a thorough exploration of ourselves, and by so doing find what it is we have to add to the quality somewhere? To make life better, because we made an appearance here, to serve in the way we think we can serve best. Succeeding is so much fun, especially if it means moving several plateaus above the one on which you spent your youth. And succeeding brings so much of the world within the realm of experience for us. We can fly on the Concorde and take a trip on the Orient Express, cruise along the coast of China if you like, or fly over the poles. Succeeding brings the world within range, including much greater opportunity and success. We tend to perform well in the role in which we habitually see ourselves. Cruising around the Med could do wonders for our self-images. Who knows, we might find just the spot to build the loveliest little European-style American retirement village with all European capital. Well, there's just no end to the good ideas that some leisurely world travel might engender. Wandering around small offbeat villages, who knows what we might see or pick up in the way of an unusual product that might go over big back in the States. It's important that we think in new directions from time to time. The more often the better. Genius has been defined as the ability to think in new directions. After all, wasn't that what typified all the great geniuses you can think of? The great artists, composers, writers, inventors. They were all inventors, all creators. They all thought in new directions. In her marvelous book, The Aquarian Conspiracy, Marilyn Ferguson writes, "If we're not learning and teaching, we are not awake and alive. Learning is not only like health, it is health. One can be just as bored sitting in the cockpit of a yacht anchored in the harbor at Portofino as sitting in one's office in New York City at 3 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, but not if one is learning or teaching. Then boredom is never present. If you're at all like me, you require learning and teaching just about every day. I call it doing some work, but learning and teaching is what it amounts to. In my case, reading and writing, teaching. I need to know that I've done something worthwhile in order to fully enjoy my leisure time or a weekend. Perhaps that's the result of 30 years of working, but for me there must be a balance of work and play, both to be fully enjoyed. I'll never reach the age when I'm no longer interested in learning and putting what I have learned into language that others can understand, enjoy, and pass along. Now, what are the odds that a person following the guidelines of this program will actually succeed? I would say his chances of failure are virtually non-existent. The odds are overwhelmingly in one's favor. In fact, there's nothing else one can do but succeed. It's all in the goal and the planning that's subsequent to the establishment of that goal, if the person is a goal-oriented person. If the person's a river person, he or she is automatically a success as long as he or she is in that river. Remember the comment, the American people can become anything they want to become. The trouble is, they seldom make that decision.
Here's the big challenge of life. You can have more than you've got because you can become more than you are. That's the challenge. And of course, the other side of the coin reads, unless you change how you are, you'll always have what you got. I have found in my experience that income does not far exceed personal development. Now, sometimes income takes a lucky jump. But sure enough, unless you grow out where it is, it'll usually come back where you are. Life has strange ways. If somebody hands you $1 million, best you become a millionaire quickly, so you get to keep the money. Otherwise, sure enough, it'll disappear. Somebody once said, if you took all the money in the world, divided it up equally among everybody, it would soon all be back in the same pockets. Incredible. Success is something you attract, not something you pursue. Success is looking for a good place to stay. So instead of going after it, you work on yourself. Personal development. See, the major question to ask on the job is not what are you getting? The major question to ask on the job is what are you becoming? See, the big question is not what am I getting paid here? The big question is what am I becoming here? Because true happiness is not contained in what you get. Happiness is contained in what you become. So that's our major subject for tonight, personal development. Of all the assignments Mr. Schoaf gave me at age 25, this was probably the most difficult. In fact, I'm still working on this one. I think it's an unending challenge to see what you can become. The next subject is called Basic Laws. And it's good to study the basics. And I call these basics primarily because they come from the Bible. Now, I'm not a theologian or a minister, and that'll be apparent. But Mr. Schoaf taught me that the Bible was a good textbook for ideas and stories and success equations, how to live the better life. I found out that was true. He also taught me that the Bible is as practical as it is spiritual, and I found out that's true. If you look at your bank account and your income and you're not happy, there are several places in the Bible to check to see what the heck's wrong so you can make the changes. And we're going to cover some of those tonight, called basics. Okay, the next subject is my favorite, setting goals. Mr. Schoaf taught me how to set goals. What a favor that was. One morning at breakfast, shortly after I met him, he said, Jim, let me see your current list of goals and let's go over them and talk about them. He said, maybe that's the best way I can help you get a better direction started. And I said, I don't have a list. He said, well, is it out in the car or home somewhere? I said, no, sir. I don't have a list anywhere. He said, well, young man, that's where we got to start. He said, I can tell you right now, if you don't have a list of your goals with you, he said, I can guess your bank balance within a few $100s. Which he did. And that got my attention. I said, you mean my bank balance would change if I had a list of goals? He said, drastically. That day, I became a willing student how to set goals. And sure enough, learning how to set goals changed my life. And I often wondered why no one had ever taught me how to set goals up until age 25. I went to high school, but if they offered it, I missed it. I went to college for a year, never heard it. I worked for Sears. And to my knowledge, Sears never taught it. Right? How to set goals. So here I am, age 25, married, my family's starting, I've been to college, I'm working, and I still don't know how to set goals. But fortunately, when I was 25, I met the man who taught me how. And it revolutionized my whole life. Economically, socially, personally, it's incredible. So I want to share with you tonight what Mr. Schoaf shared with me, how to set goals. It can be a life changer. Okay. The next subject is the negative part of the seminar. Life is part negative, so we got to talk about the negative. And this subject is called diseases of attitude. Diseases of attitude. There's a lot of things that can wreck your chances to do well. We live in a rather dangerous world, so you got to be not only wise, you got to be careful. Now, attitude diseases are just as bad as physical diseases, right? High blood pressure, heart trouble. I mean, a lot of things will ace your chances to do well. So you've got to be careful. And attitude diseases are deadly. I mean, they'll destroy all the good things you start. Okay? So we'll go through those attitude diseases, how to spot them, how to look for them, what they are, and the cure. And I'm a pro on these because I've had them all, so I can give you excellent advice on these. Now, the last subject we're going to consider tonight is called the day that turns your life around. The day that turns your life around. And under this subject, we're going to talk about the emotions that can change your life. Human beings are emotional creatures, and emotions are powerful for life change. Now, of course, emotions are so powerful they can go either way on you. Emotions can either build or destroy. So you really have to employ emotions properly. We call civilization the intelligent management of human emotions. If you can intelligently apply your emotions in the right direction, no telling what can happen. Could turn your life around one day would be sufficient. So we'll talk about those. Okay. Now that's a lot to cover in one evening, but we'll keep at it here and see if we can't get it all done. I'd like to have you now jot down the theme of the seminar. Every seminar should have a theme, I guess. We've got one. It's on some of our literature if you happen to notice it, but if you didn't, for your notes, here it is. The theme of the seminar goes like this. The major key to your better future is you. That's the theme of our seminar tonight. The major key to your better future is you. And I'd like to have you underline two words just to give it some added punch. Underline the word major and the word you, so that it reads, the major key to your better future is you. Now, my first suggestion is transfer this to a card or something where you can put it up, where you can see it every day. Preferably put it up where you can see it at the beginning of the day, before you go off to put the day together. This is a good phrase just to glance at, to keep in mind as you're putting the day together. It's called the silent seminar. If you'll just let this talk to you during the day, I found it to be tremendously helpful. The major key to your better future is you. For a big share of my life now, I didn't have this one quite figured out. Among a lot of things I didn't have quite figured out. Many things used to puzzle me back in those early days. I used to wonder why two people could work for the same company, one make twice as much money. Now, see, that used to puzzle me. And maybe they were the same age, graduated from the same school, live in the same community, work for the same company, with the same products and the same services. They've got the same traffic, the same problems, and one makes $1,000 a month, the other one makes $2,000 a month. Now, that was my puzzling question. Why would this long list be the same and the money twice as much? I asked, what's the difference between $1,000 a month and $2,000 a month? And I don't mean $1,000 a month, right? I could figure that out. But what makes the difference? Why would one person do twice as well, 3 times as well? Speaking economically, now I know there's more than one way to do well. I understand that. But in this little narrow area called compensation, what's the difference? Well, back then, with my faulty thinking, I'm trying to reason it out. I thought, well, maybe time makes some of the difference, right? Some people do better because they have more time. I used to say, Harold ought to be able to do well. He's got a lot of time. If I had all of Harold's time, I could do well. Now, that's got to be dumb, right? Number one, you can't get somebody else's time. A guy says to me one time, he says, you know, if I had some extra time, I could make some extra money. I said, then forget it. There isn't any extra time. Hey, when the clock strikes 12 midnight, that about wraps it up, right? It's over. You say to the guy, what are you doing? He says, I'm looking for extra time. See, they'll come and take you away, right? There isn't any more time. Now, if you can't get more time, which you can't, what could you get more of that would make a difference in economic results? And here's the key word. Make it a part of your notes. We're going to consider it tonight. The word is value. And I have a little phrase for your notes. Value makes the difference in results. Value makes the difference. You can't get more time, but you can create more value. Now, here's the first lesson of economics. Everybody should learn it from the time they're old enough to understand what a dollar means, how to earn one, how to get one, how to keep one, what to do with it. First lesson of economics. We primarily get paid for value. That's lesson 1. Bringing value to the marketplace. That's how you get paid. You don't get paid for the time. I know it takes time to bring value to the marketplace, but you get paid for the value, not the time. Now, since that's true, here's one of the key questions of the evening. Is it possible to become twice as valuable at the marketplace and make twice as much money in the same time? Could you become 3 times as valuable? Make 3 times as much money in the same time? Is that possible? The answer is yes, if. And it's always if, right? Life is known as the big if. Harry Truman once said, life is iffy. How true. And here's the big if we're going to consider it tonight. It's possible to do much better at the marketplace if you go to work primarily on yourself. And that's the theme of our seminar tonight. Learning to work primarily on yourself. People have asked me for the last 24 years, how do you develop an above average income? And the answer is, become an above average person. Develop an above average handshake. Some people want to be successful, they don't even work on their handshake. As easy as that would be to start on. They let it slide, they don't understand. Develop an above average smile. Develop an above average excitement. Develop an above average interest in other people. Develop an above average intensity to win. See, that'll change everything. Probably one of the most frustrating experiences in life is looking for an above average job with above average pay without becoming an above average person. It's called frustration. And Mr. Schoaf gave me probably the greatest clue he gave me when I first met him. He said, Jim, if you want to be wealthy and happy the rest of your life, just learn this lesson well. He said, learn to work harder on yourself than you do on your job. Then Mr. Schoaf gave me probably one of the most important clues among so many things he taught me, but this was in those early days. Mr. Schoaf was very kind, but he was also very abrupt. And he had these interesting questions to ask. I'm giving him a little rundown one day on how things hadn't worked out for me. He said, Mr. Owen, I've got the answer for you if you will listen carefully. And listen carefully I did that day and for the next 5 years. If somebody's wealthy and happy, you gotta listen. He said, Jim, I've only known you a short time. But he said, it's already my honest opinion that for things to change for you, you got to change. That wasn't quite the answer I was looking for. But that's the answer he gave me, and I pass it along to you on this warm summer evening in Anaheim, California, 1981. For things to change for you, you've got to change. Otherwise, it isn't going to change. Before I met Mr. Schoaf, I used to say, I sure hope things will change. That seemed to be my only hope. If it isn't going to change, I'm in serious trouble. And then I discovered it isn't going to change, so I'm in serious trouble. See, I can tell you what the 80s are going to be like. You have dropped into the right place. I did a seminar one time for Standard Oil executives and management in Honolulu. And we're having a conference one day on this big conference table. And one of them said to me, Mr. Rohn, you know some fairly important people halfway around the world. What do you think the 80s are going to be like? I said, gentlemen, I do know the right people. I can tell you. So they all listened very carefully. And I said, gentlemen, based on my wide experience, I can really honestly say to you, in my opinion, in the 80s, it's going to be about like it's always been. Now, of course, I said that to make a point, but I also said it because it's accurate. It's going to be about like it's always been. It isn't going to change. The tide comes in and then what? It goes out. For 6,500 years that we know of, recorded history, and probably long before that. So it is not going to change. It gets light and then what? It turns dark. 6,500 years. See, it's not likely to change. And we're not to be startled by that. And if the sun goes down, the guy says, what's happened? What's happened? It means he hasn't been here long, I guess, right? It always goes down about this time. The guy says, well, I don't like that arrangement. Well, you got to talk to somebody besides me, right? It gets light, then it turns dark. In rotation, the next season after fall is what? Winter. Pray tell, how often does winter follow fall? Every year regularly for the last 6,500 that we know of. See, it is not going to change. Now, some winters are long, and some are short, and some are hard, and some are easy, but they always come right after falls. It isn't going to change. Sometimes you can figure it out. Sometimes there's no way to figure it out. Sometimes it goes well. Sometimes it gets in a knot. Sometimes it sails along. Sometimes it gets in reverse. See, that's not going to change. The last 6,000 years reads like this: opportunity mixed with difficulty. That's how it reads. It isn't going to change. The man says, well, if it isn't going to change, how will my life ever change? Answer, when you change. And whether I'm talking to high school kids or business executives, my message is always the same. And it goes like this: the only way it gets better for you is when you get better.
As you're gearing up to step back into your normal life, if you haven't already done that, I thought I'd just give you 5 quick little triggers, just reminders that are so simple, but these are the 5 things that I personally did. But first step is stand guard at the door of your mind. I got that from my teacher, Jim Rohn. I remember he came to me one day and I was really frustrated. I was saying, I'm working so hard and nothing's really working and I don't understand it. And I was super frustrated. And I remember he came to me and he said, Tony, he said, listen to me. He said, tell me what are you reading? He said, tell me who you're talking to. He said, tell me who you're surrounding yourself with. And I said, well, I'm mostly isolated by myself. And I said, but I'm so frustrated. He said, listen to me. He said, answer this question for me. He said, what happens in the world if, let's say, your worst enemy comes by and drops sugar in your coffee? And I said, well, you don't have sweet coffee. He said, well, what if your best friend, even by accident, drops 1 drop of strychnine? What if it's your brother, your sister, your mother, your father, somebody you love, accidentally drops 1 drop of strychnine? I said, well, then you'd be dead. He goes, that's right. So remember, life is both sugar and strychnine, so watch your coffee. And what he really meant was stand guard at the door of your mind. Because today, we live in a world where the media, they're not bad people, they're good people, but they're companies. And they got to take care of their shareholders. And the only way they win is by getting your eyeballs. And the only way to get your eyeballs in a world where there's so much information is to startle you. And so we're living in a culture of so much fear. So if you're going to take your life back, you got to take into a limited amount of that media and be able to pursue it, not let it pursue you. So what Jim Rohn used to say to me is, he said, Tony, this is your new daily practice. Because this is what I really want to get to you guys here is if you want to keep momentum, if you've joined me for those few days there, the 5, 6 days or 7, I guess we did for the challenge, or you went immersion with me as well, the key is to get momentum and keep momentum. If you work your tail off to get momentum going and then you drop it, oh my God, you got to start all over again. And so the way you do that is you have a daily practice. It's not like, years ago, I went to a seminar by Jim Rohn and then my life was perfect. It's like I kept immersing myself in all these things, but I also made sure each day I was making some form of progress. And if you want to know what makes people happy, write down progress equals happiness. Think about it. You can achieve everything in the world and still go, is this all there is? You can achieve something and be excited, but for how long? The only way you stay happy and excited is to keep growing. Progress is everything. If you're making progress on your body, progress in your mind, progress in your emotion, you're going to feel happy. When you get there, you feel excited. But again, for how long? A year? No. 6 months, 3 months, 3 weeks, 3 days, 3 hours? Because we're not made to just sit and, be successful. We're made to grow. We're made to, then as we grow, we have something to give. So step 1 is, let's see if you can put a little system standing guard at your mind. And Jim Rohn said to me back then, the number 1 thing you have to do is read 30 minutes a day. So never less than 20 minutes. And I'm not talking about what comes to your phone. I'm not talking about clickbait. I mean a book. I mean something that you pursue. Great ideas are never going to interrupt you. They have to be pursued. And if you don't pursue them, you're going to get what everybody else has, which is all this fear, all this uncertainty, all this stuff that won't work, because everybody's focused on what won't work, what can't happen. Why? Because they're afraid. They're afraid to fail. They're afraid to try and feel like they're not enough. So you got to stand guard of that mind by feeding your mind. Jim Rohn used to say to me, success leaves clues. If you want things to get better, you got to get better. If you want things to change, you got to change. But you got to do it deliberately and consciously. And he used to say to me constantly, he said, Tony, you've got to constantly find a way to feed that mind, something that's got strategy in it, philosophy, something that's going to improve the quality of your life. And if you really learn it, you can help the people you love with the things you learn. And so I got hooked. And so I decided I'm going to read a book a day. I took a speed reading course and I didn't read a book a day, but I read 700 books over the period of 7 years, all in the area of philosophy, physiology, emotion, the things to me that mattered most. And what I really try to do is each day try to use something I learned, not just read, not just let my learning lead to knowledge. Jim used to say, if you let your learning lead to knowledge, you become a fool. If you let your learning lead to action, that's when your life changes. So I started being aware of who was saying what I was taking in. Jim used to say, success leaves clues. If someone's successful, they're not lucky. They're doing something different than you. Figure out what they're doing different. And he said, the first thing is find out what they're reading. Find out what successful people do, what wealthy people read, what happy people read, and read that. Feed your mind. So step number one is every single day, you got to do something and feed your mind. And if you do that, if you just made that habit, say even 5 days a week, I swear to you, it'll change your life. But again, not what comes to you, what you pursue. Something that has real value, a strategy that can change the game for your business or your life, a philosophy that can make you more fulfilled or happy, a way to make a difference for the people you love. That's a daily sought out practice for me. Started when I was 17, I'm now 61. That's why I have the privilege to be able to work with so many people. But most importantly, I've applied these things to me, so I have the life that I want. I don't have a life that I'm promoting to other people. So that's number one. What's number two, real fast? If you really feed your mind every day, feed and strengthen your mind with a 30-minute practice. And by the way, I started out reading all the time, but then I realized I was in my car all the time in those days. And I was like, I'm going to turn this to a university on wheels. So that was one of the smart things. I invested in myself. And so I'd go down there, and because I invested $300 in 6 tapes, I remember Jim Rohn said, repetition is the mother of skill. You hear something once and you kind of understand it. You hear it again, you kind of feel, you hear it enough. He said, listen to stuff every day until pretty soon the things I was hearing in my head were these new thoughts from brilliant people instead of the old thoughts that were basically whatever I'd been around before. And it changed my life. It started to shift me because I fed my mind. But then number two, you got to every day feed and strengthen your body. And you got to do something, even in the middle of COVID, if it's still there, even if it's lockdown, because if you don't take care of your body, it affects your mind, doesn't it? When you think about this, what is it that screws up everybody's life? Fear is the number one thing that keeps people from doing what's necessary. And anger and rage, while it can mobilize us, if it becomes part of your life on a regular basis, it destroys it. So how do you balance that out? Well, fear, anger, they're both physical, aren't they? Think about, what do you feel like if you're really afraid? Ever been so afraid that your throat got really dry, or you feel this feeling in your gut, right? That's physical. Courage is also physical. Again, courage does not mean you're not afraid. Courage means you're afraid, but you do it anyway, right? It's a way of being in your body. So one of the things that I started doing early on is understanding, and those of you who spent 4 days with me, you know day and night, because we did it, and it's in your body still, how to change the way you feel instantly by a radical change in your body. And so I really want to recommend you do something at least 5 days a week. First thing when you wake up in the morning, it doesn't have to be an hour workout, even 30 minutes. It can be something as little as 5 or 10 minutes, but it's about changing your body so radically. And it's also about developing a simple daily discipline. It's like, I don't negotiate with myself. I tell my brain, I don't go, oh, wait, I'm not ready. Or let me count to 10, or maybe I'll do it tomorrow. That pattern of thinking is what destroys most people's lives and their dreams. You can settle for a life like most people have, or you can create your dreams, but to do it, you need to be able to push yourself. So you need to train yourself in little ways. Or it could be just going and lifting weights, and you're going to do like 10 minutes of pushing yourself, or a sprint, or a really fast walk, anything. Because when you get your blood pushing, when you push beyond what's comfortable, it develops this determination inside you, this sense of will that you will then use everywhere else. I always say, if you discipline yourself in one area of your life, you're going to be able to do it even more in other areas. You get momentum. Momentum is everything. So if you train your mind, great, but you got to train your body as well in some way. And I don't care, again, if it's 5 or 10 minutes where you really push yourself, or a full-blown workout, it's got to get there, because when you do that regularly, you're going to find yourself having a better mind. The mind and body can't be separated. They're completely connected. You work on both of them, you're going to have a different world, and you're not going to be shut down. And when other people are like, oh, it can't be done, just move, I'll handle it. It's a different way of being, isn't it? Third key, in order to really believe you can turn things around, you need a role model. And so throughout my life, I looked at different ones. The earliest one I looked for, since I grew up poor and we had no money, and that seemed to be the real issue. My mom left all 4 of my fathers. But as I look back on it, it really wasn't money. They could have had all the money in the world and they still would have fought. But it looked like money. So I thought, wow, if I could make money, my family will never have this pain. So I looked around for role models. And I grew up in a place where there were no financial role models. Everyone was broke. And I was like, who also started with nothing like me and then turned it around and grew and become some humble beginnings. And I saw, Sir John Templeton. Some of you may have heard of him, brilliant man, first billionaire investor. Started with nothing. And the way he did it is he saved money and he invested during the darkest times. And so I saw Sir John as that. And when I was around when COVID happened, I started looking around to see what are people and businesses that haven't given up. Even though everything's shut down, they found a way to serve their clients. And even though their way wasn't my way, it reminded me and inspired me to say there is a way. That's how I started building the way that we now deliver for so many people virtually around the world. So find a role model and get a plan. So number one, feed and strengthen your mind every day, 30 minutes a day. So I use audio. That's why I've used it forever in that area, because it just gives you more rhythm. But it's either read or audio, something you pursued. Every day, strength and feed your body. You make it stronger so that you're psychologically stronger. Find the role model, get a plan. What's for? Massive action. Like everybody wants to say, well, I don't know where to start. What do I do first? Well, listen, I got all kinds of tools to help people do that. But the most important thing is do something. You don't know what to do, throw the rock. Wherever it lands, talk to the next person, right? It's like you need massive action. And then you need to see what's working or not and keep changing, and you'll get there. Anyone can get to where they want to go as long as they get in motion. But again, it's about momentum. And that's the main reason I came to join you. Last one, step 5, real fast. Give more than you expect to receive. If you are constantly trying to take care of people, give to people. If you're in the worst time of your life, you can give to people. I promise you, everything will change. I won't tell you the whole story, bore you with it right now, because I want to do this real quick for you. But one of the most difficult times of my life when I was completely broke, not even enough gas in my car, trying to figure out how to survive, not able to pay my rent. And I won't bore you with the story, but I had an experience where I took the last $19 I had and I gave it to somebody else that needed it. And afterwards, I was euphoric. It made no sense, but it was the first time in my life when, people say, I got to get beyond scarcity. You never get beyond scarcity. You got to start beyond scarcity. You got to declare. You got to take the last seed you got and plant them. And I remember, the next day I got a check for $1,200, which in those days I could have survived on for almost a month from somebody that owed it to me and not paid me for 2 years. The very next day after I gave every dime I had, I had no idea I was even going to eat. It was the right moment. It was the right situation. And I did what was right. So find someone who's worse off than you are in the middle of COVID. Do something for them. And I promise you, you'll remember how great your life is and you'll feel fulfilled, because it's not about us. You know what I mean? It's like, it's not about me, it's about we. And the more you can get connected, either people you love or even strangers, and do things, not for brownie points, just because it's right, somehow inside your own soul, your own spirit, you remember that problems are not permanent. Only your soul's permanent. And you remember that I'm made for more than just solving this stupid little problem. It lifts the human spirit. So those 5 keys, I really encourage you to consider as you're dealing with COVID or coming out of it here to maximize.
Opportunity beckons more surely when misfortune comes upon a person than it ever does when that person is riding the crest of a wave of success. It sharpens a person's wits, if you let it, enabling him to see more clearly and evaluate his situation with a more knowledgeable judgment. It's been my observation that people seem to be growing more and more fearful of risk of any kind. They seem bent on an almost frantic scramble for security without taking the time to think it all the way through. There's only one form of security we can attain during our lives, and it's inner security, the kind that comes from courage, experience, and the ability and the willingness to learn, to grow, to attempt the unknown. Security isn't what the wise person looks for. It's opportunity. And once we begin looking for that, we find it on every side. You can measure opportunity with the same yardstick that measures the risk involved. They go together. The famous World War II Admiral William Bull Halsey said, "Touch a thistle timidly, and it pricks you. Grasp it boldly, and its spines crumble. All problems become smaller if you don't dodge them, but confront them." I think we all know that, but we tend to forget it between problems. All problems become smaller if you don't dodge them, but confront them. I particularly like Epictetus's line that adversity introduces a person to himself. Now that's when we get to really know ourselves. That's when we come face to face with the real person we are and the stage of our maturity or growth to that point. It does no good at all to worry about times in the past when we failed to measure up in our own eyes. We weren't ready yet. We hadn't at that point in our lives matured sufficiently. We weren't wise enough. Besides, that's in the past. It's how we stand up to trouble now that matters. And we should keep in mind the truth and wisdom contained in his advice that opportunity beckons more surely when misfortune comes upon a person than it ever does when that person is riding the crest of a wave of success. Most very successful people can remember that their success was discovered and built out of adversity of some kind. It's not the problems that beset us. Problems are surprisingly pretty much the same for millions of others. It's how we react to problems that determines not only our degree of growth and maturity, but our future success, and perhaps much of our health. It's good to get rid of that word security once and for all. It makes us feel free again, as we felt as children, and we begin to see what this business of living is all about. We begin to really enjoy it.
Have you ever given much thought to the idea that the spoils in life go to the risk takers? If you'll give it some thought, I think you'll come up with the same solution I arrived at. A survey indicated that 98% of the men in the country are looking for security in their work. That is, they're mainly interested in losing themselves deep in the warm, nourishing viscera of some large corporation, which is fine. I'm not knocking it. I'm just commenting on it. But these are not, as a rule, the risk takers. They're more the play it safers. And while they can have good and successful careers all their working lives, the chances are against they're hitting the big jackpot. Now, the reason I say this is because this sort of life, as a rule, does not encourage a man to do much more than he has to do. And he'll usually spend his free time, which comes to something like 72 hours a week when he's neither working nor sleeping, in pursuits not calculated to help him get ahead in the world. Now, the man who risks his spare time writing a book, painting pictures, fiddling with inventions, continuing his education, is generally the one in this kind of milieu who will advance above his fellows. But the man who risks all of his time on a goal he wants to reach, on a dream in his heart, who stakes his livelihood and the livelihood of his family upon his own brains and the proper use of his time, and tackles the world single-handed, here's the risk-taker to whom the spoils will generally accrue. Now, I'm not talking about the impractical dreamer and stargazer. I'm talking about the man of action who gets out and raises the dust in the world. He might take some king-size pratfalls and be snickered at by friends and relatives of a more conservative bent, but he'll usually make the grade if he stays with it, and earn their admiration, if not envy, before he's through. You know, one of the biggest factors in his favor is the size of the group he belongs to. According to the most reliable figures I can find, this risk-taker belongs to only about 2% of the population. And since he's generally working on an idea that will in some way serve the big 98%, the odds swing rather favorably to his side. Additionally, a man on his own must think. He must devote more of his days to thinking. Conversely, the man with a good steady job who's familiar with his work and surroundings can go along pretty well from day to day without doing any creative thinking at all. And as I said, we have a tendency to do no more than we have to. Anybody who spends a good deal of his time thinking is going to come up with a good idea once in a while. The law of averages is definitely on his side. And if you think about it a minute, you'll realize that he only needs a few, maybe only one really good idea to make it big. Now, the more you think about it and analyze it, the more it makes you think that what appears to be the risk-taker really isn't nearly as big a risk-taker as you might imagine. The cards are stacked pretty well for him from several important standpoints. But as I said in the beginning, the spoils definitely go to the risk-taker. Life is full of hidden contradictions. One is that the man who thinks he's playing it safe really isn't, and the man who seems to be taking the greatest risks, considering the law of averages, is playing it safest. People who do well in the world, being creative and willing to take a calculated risk, are people who manage to overcome the fear of laughter. Anytime you attempt anything in which you risk failure, you run the risk of having people laugh at you. A college professor worked for many years on an invention. He tramped all over New England trying to interest capital in his device for making the human voice travel along a wire. The people laughed at him. It was, of course, plumb idiotic, they said, to suppose that the human voice could be carried along a wire and heard for many miles or even for a single mile. But our old friend and benefactor Alexander Graham Bell could not be laughed out of it. And every time we pick up the telephone, we salute the man who stayed on course despite the laughter. Millions of people laughing in derision could not hurt us an iota, but we stand in mortal terror of it. Men and women who can prove themselves heroes in great crises tremble before derision.
It's a queer quirk of human nature we probably develop as children. It has cost much. It's changed the history of the world. Sometimes the price of a laugh has meant the slamming of a door of fame and fortune, or even immortality. Elias Howe invented the sewing machine, but it nearly rusted away before the American women stopped laughing about it and could be persuaded to make use of it. With their sewing done so quickly, they argued, what would they ever do with all their spare time? So a biographer paints a tragic picture. The man who had done more than any other to lighten the work of women was forced to borrow a suit of clothes on an occasion of a public appearance. Men are as bad as women when it comes to resisting new ideas. The typewriter had been a demonstrated success for years before businessmen could be persuaded to buy it. How could anyone have letters to write, they argued, to justify the investment of $100 in a writing machine? Only when the Remingtons sold patent rights to the Telegraph Company and two groups of salesmen worked in competition was the resistance finally broken down. Xerography faced the same kind of problem when it was first introduced, and other inventions have had similar battles. Here's an extract from a notebook of Robert Fulton, who invented the steamship who changed the world from sail to steam on the oceans of the world. He wrote, "As I had occasion daily to pass to and from the shipyard where my boat was in progress, I often loitered near the groups of strangers and heard various remarks as to the object of this new vehicle. The language was uniformly that of scorn, sneer, or ridicule. The loud laugh often rose at my expense, the dry jest, the wise calculations of losses or expenditures, the dull repetition of Fulton's folly. Never did a single encouraging remark, a bright hope, a warm wish cross my path. Never did a single encouraging remark, a bright hope, a warm wish cross my path." And that's about what you can expect when you try something new. Emerson once commented that no one ever falls ill, but that passers-by idly hope that he will die. And the same perversity and built-in envy cause people to think or hope that any new idea or plan that runs counter to established principle will fail. Speaking of Emerson, he also wrote, "Pythagoras was misunderstood, and Socrates, and Jesus, and Luther, and Copernicus, and Galileo, and Newton, and every pure and wise spirit that ever took flesh. To be great is to be misunderstood." You know, we tend to forget that the greatest people, the greatest writers, the greatest teachers, were for the most part in violent disagreement with their times and the way things were being done. We seem to have become so flabby in our acceptance of anything that we fail to do anything personally about what we see about it. Norman Cousins has written that the biggest issue of all in the years just ahead is not just the squandering of physical resources, but the squandering of human resources. What constitutes failure? What does a person have to do or not do in order to fail? Herman Melville died in 1891. He wrote the book Moby Dick, the whaling epic with its tremendous metaphysical concept of evil at the age of 30. The book was published in 1851, sold a few copies, and then was promptly forgotten except by the limited connoisseurs of creative writing. Melville lived 40 years beyond publication of Moby Dick. He considered himself and his book a failure, and from a publisher's point of view, Melville was right. Of his other novels, Billy Budd remained unpublished for 40 years after his death, and like Moby Dick, has since become a literary classic. Today, sales of Melville's works run into the millions, but there is no retroactive compensation for the author's troubled soul or shoddy purse. So what is failure? Failure does not come to a person because he is not recognized by the multitudes during his lifetime or ever. Our success or failure has nothing to do with the opinions of others. It has only to do with our own opinion of ourselves and what we're doing. The only person that can be called a failure is that person who tries to succeed at nothing. Success, as far as a person is concerned, does not lie in achievement. It lies in striving, reaching, attempting. Any person who decides upon a course of action he deems to be worthy of him and sets out to accomplish that goal is a success right then and there. Therefore, failure consists not in failing to reach our goals, but rather in not establishing them. Failure consists of not trying, and certainly Melville and all the others who were not recognized until long after their death were successful during their lives because of the fact that they strove all of their lives and gave to their work the best that was in them. And for every Melville that we read about, there have been millions of men and women equally successful, of whom we'll never hear. People who didn't write books or try to save the world, but who, in their own quiet way, in their own places, gave to what they had chosen the best that was in them. Melville must have known deep within himself when he finished the last page of Moby Dick that he had not failed. Just as each of us knows how much of himself he's giving to what it's been given him, what he has chosen to do. People who play it too safe take the greatest risks. Did you know that? In the long haul, the intelligent risk-takers develop the greatest security. It's a wise person who learns the importance of risk-taking. During World War II, psychologist E. Paul Torrance made a study of United States aces flying in the Pacific Theater of Operations. He reported that the most salient characteristic of the ace was his risk-taking ability. Throughout his life, he had kept testing the limits of his abilities, and the life histories of these men showed that they were highly resistant to accidents, and in combat, they suffered fewer casualties than pilots who were inclined to play it safe. Dr. Torrance said, living itself is a risky business. If we spent half as much time learning how to take risks as we spend avoiding them, we wouldn't have nearly so much to fear in life. In all walks of life, the most successful people are the risk-takers. Now, by that I mean they risk believing in their own ideas, striking out toward their own goals, standing up for what they believe to be right. They take the risk of being different when they believe in something. Now, this has a tendency to make the going a little tougher for a while, but they almost always wind up ahead of the game eventually. Risk-takers realize there's nothing wrong with an occasional failure. The play-it-safers seem to think a failure means the end of the world. The risk-takers are not foolhardy. Getting back to the World War II aces for a moment, it was found that these men were very fussy about their airplanes, armament, and equipment. They were painstaking in preparation, highly disciplined in following instructions and what they'd been taught. But in an encounter with the enemy, they would immediately take charge and go on the offense. The best defense is often a good offense. The best pass defense in football is to rush the quarterback. When a storm comes up, ships in the harbor head for the raging open sea unless they're protected in slips. In the harbor, they could drag their anchors and wind up on the beach or the breakwater. So what appears to be risk-taking is often the most intelligent course to follow. It leads to security, while what would appear to be the safest course of action can lead to disaster or simply nowhere. A young woman whose romance had gone on the rocks told her mother that she was never going to permit herself to fall in love again. You only get hurt, she said. And if you don't fall in love, her mother said, you don't live. It's another one of those risks the successful person is willing to take. Everyone runs risks, quite sizable risks, every day of his life. Risks he takes for granted or isn't even aware of. But when an unusual situation comes along that involves risk-taking, how do you decide whether or not to go ahead? When a situation comes along that involves risk and you don't know whether to go ahead or hold back, reassess your goals. What are you trying to accomplish? What are you working toward? Will taking this risk, if it works out successfully, help you toward your goals?